Hey, deep divers. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a single source.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's an excerpt from Cheap ABA, Adult Autism, and the Mother Wound, Healing in a Neurodiverse World.
Okay.
And it's a really fascinating look at how, like, the mother-child relationship can impact autistic adults, particularly when, like, their communication styles and their needs kind of clash,
Yeah.
sometimes leading to something called the mother wound.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack what that means and explore the potential for healing. So yeah, let's dive in.
All right.
So can you maybe just start off by explaining for people who might not be familiar with this idea of the mother wound?
Sure.
Like, what does that actually mean?
So the mother wound, it's basically, it can be any emotional pain that kind of stems from when a child's needs aren't met in the relationship with the mother.
Oh, so it's not necessarily like some big traumatic event. It can be a lot of smaller things.
Yeah, and it can build up over time, So for example, if you have a child on the autism spectrum who, is maybe struggling with sensory overload at like a family gathering,
Boy.
their mother who, maybe wasn't familiar with sensory sensitivities at the time, might just tell him to like stop being dramatic or something,
Right.
And on the surface, it seems like a small incident, but for a child who's already like trying to navigate a world that's really overwhelming, that invalidation can really have like a huge impact.
Yeah, I could see how it would kind of chip away at your sense of...
Exactly. It can really affect their self-worth and just create this lasting wound.
Right, and that's just one example.
Exactly. And it's not always intentional either.
Right.
The excerpt really emphasizes that, especially in past generations when there wasn't as much awareness about autism, many mothers they lacked the resources or understanding to support their autistic child.
So do you think like societal pressures maybe played a part in that as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Back then, there was so much pressure to fit in,
Yeah.
to appear normal. So many mothers, they thought they were doing what was best by pushing their kids to suppress their autistic traits.
Right, to kind of mask who they really were.
Exactly. And we know now how damaging that can be.
Yeah.
It's incredibly exhausting to have to constantly mask your true self.
Mm-hmm.
And it can lead to so much anxiety, burnout, and just a real disconnect from who you are at your core.
It's like you're constantly being told that who you are is not okay.
Exactly.
You need to be different.
And that's a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah, so it sounds like it creates this double bind for autistic children. Like on the one hand, there's this pressure from society to conform.
Right.
And then on the other hand, they might be feeling this pressure to conform within their own families.
Exactly. And that's where the mother wound comes in. It's this feeling of not being accepted.
Right.
Of having these core parts of yourself just dismissed or invalidated by the one person who's supposed to love and support you unconditionally.
That makes a lot of sense. So when we're talking about this specifically in relation to autistic adults, why is this mother wound particularly challenging for them?
Well, autism itself can kind of amplify the effects in a few ways.
Okay.
So, for example, many autistic individuals have very specific emotional and sensory needs.
Yeah.
And these needs might have been misunderstood or dismissed as being too sensitive or overreacting, you know?
I could definitely.
Especially coming from your mother.
Yeah, like the person who should be your safe haven
Exactly.
is telling you that you're
overreacting, yeah.
And then, of course, there's the pressure to mask, which is often even more intense for autistic individuals,
right.
Because they're constantly feeling this pressure to suppress their natural ways of communicating, interacting.
So it's not just societal pressure. It's also familial pressure to conform.
That's right. And all of that can lead to this sense of inauthenticity and just a loss of self.
The excerpt actually mentions the story of Sarah, an autistic woman who spent years masking her true self.
Oh, wow.
Just to please her mother, and it led to chronic anxiety and just this feeling of emptiness.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, because she wasn't living in alignment with who she truly was.
Right. And I think this is a really good example of how, like, even well-intentioned actions, when they're based on a limited understanding, can have this really profound impact.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not even about these big gestures. It's the little things, like, well-meaning advice that just completely misses the mark. Telling an autistic person to just try harder or be more normal.
Right.
It's so invalidating.
Yeah, because it's not about willpower or effort.
Exactly. It's about having a different way of processing the world.
Right.
A different neurology.
And then on top of all of that, sometimes it can be really challenging for autistic individuals to articulate their emotional pain.
Right.
So it's like they're experiencing all of these things, and they don't always have the words to explain how they're feeling.
So it all gets bottled up, which makes it even harder to heal.
Yeah, so it's like this combination of unmet needs, the pressure to conform, the invalidation, and then the difficulty expressing yourself. And this is all happening in the context of a relationship that's supposed to be like nurturing and supportive.
Right.
It's no wonder that this can be such a complex and painful experience for autistic adults.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack, for sure. But the source doesn't leave us in a place of despair.
Okay.
It actually offers some pathways to healing.
That's good.
Even if the relationship with the mother remains complicated.
So what are some of those steps towards healing that the excerpt highlights?
Well, the first and maybe the most important step is acknowledging your feelings.
Okay.
It's about giving yourself permission to feel hurt or angry or conflicted without any judgment.
Do you think that that can be difficult for someone who maybe has been told their whole life to suppress their emotions?
Oh, absolutely. It can be incredibly difficult to allow yourself to feel those things, especially when you've been made to feel like your feelings are wrong.
Yeah.
But it's such a crucial first step.
Okay.
And then the excerpt suggests seeking understanding.
Right.
And this doesn't mean excusing any hurtful behavior.
Right.
But it means trying to see your mother's actions in the context of her own life.
Oh, so like understanding the societal pressures that she might have been facing.
Exactly, or the limited knowledge about autism that might have existed at the time.
So it's about having a wider perspective.
That's right.
And recognizing that your mother might have been coming from a place of limited understanding.
Exactly. And a lot of mothers, especially from older generations, they just didn't have the tools or information to fully understand their children's needs.
Right.
And while that doesn't excuse anything, it can help us to approach the situation with more compassion.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm also curious to know, like, what role does professional help play in this?
Oh, it's huge. The excerpt really emphasizes the importance of therapy and support.
Okay.
And specifically from therapists who understand both autism and family dynamics,
Right.
they can provide this safe space to process all these complicated emotions.
It's like having a guide to help you kind of navigate this difficult terrain.
Exactly. And along with professional help, the excerpt also talks about self-compassion.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so important.
Yeah, like giving yourself permission to feel those things.
You have to remind yourself that your feelings are valid and your experiences are real. You don't have to minimize your pain just to maintain the relationship.
Right, because ultimately your healing is about you.
Exactly. And that leads us to the last step that the excerpt talks about, which is the possibility of having open conversations with your mother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I imagine that can be a pretty difficult conversation to have.
It can be, and it's important to approach it with caution.
Yeah.
You know, make sure you feel safe and prepared.
Right.
Because some mothers might be receptive to understanding and making amends, while others might not. And that's okay.
Right.
The important thing is that you've honored your own healing journey and prioritized your well-being.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that healing the mother wound isn't necessarily about having this perfect resolution with your mother.
Right.
It's more about finding peace within yourself.
Exactly. It's about understanding the complexities of the relationship, acknowledging your pain, and taking steps to nurture your own well-being.
Regardless of where the relationship stands.
Yeah.
And part of that, as the source puts it, is about reclaiming your narrative.
Yes, definitely. And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, well, on that note,
Yeah.
I think let's hold that thought and we'll dive into this concept of reclaiming your narrative in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. You know, reclaiming your narrative, it's such a powerful idea because I think for so long, autistic people have felt defined by, you know, their diagnosis or by how other people see them, like they've had this weight placed upon them. It shapes their whole experience.
It's almost like shifting from feeling limited by those perceptions
Exactly.
to actually taking control.
It's about recognizing that, you know, the mother wound is there.
Yeah.
It's significant, but it doesn't have to be the whole story.
Right.
Healing allows you to move beyond that and really embrace who you are.
And a big part of that seems to be this idea of embracing neurodiversity.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So it's basically recognizing that being autistic isn't a deficit.
Right.
It's just a different way of being in the world. And those differences actually bring unique strength.
So instead of trying to fit into a box, you're celebrating those differences.
Exactly. It's about honoring your own way of thinking, your own way of communicating. And a big part of that is understanding your own emotional needs.
Yeah, especially because for a lot of autistic people, that might involve unlearning some of the messages they've received growing up.
Right, like messages that told them to suppress their feelings or to mask.
So it's kind of like giving yourself permission to experience that full range of human emotion.
Exactly. And recognizing that your emotions are valid.
Yeah.
They give you information
Right.
about your needs and your experiences.
So it's a journey of self-discovery.
Yes.
Where you're really connecting with your true self.
And then from that self-discovery comes self-acceptance. Right? Accepting that you are perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, and that those autistic traits are a part of who you are.
Exactly.
Not something to be ashamed of.
And that's the beautiful thing about healing.
Yeah.
It's not about erasing the past.
Right.
It's about transforming it into a source of strength.
And the excerpt also talked about how healing isn't linear.
Yeah, it's important to remember that there are going to be ups and downs.
Right. It's not going to be this perfect.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination.
And I think a really important point that the excerpt makes is that healing doesn't require a perfect relationship with your mother.
Oh, that's so important to remember.
Yeah.
Because you can't control how she responds.
Right.
But you can control your own journey.
Yeah.
You can prioritize your own well-being.
And that's really empowering.
It is.
To realize that you have that control.
Yeah, it's really about focusing on what you can control.
It's been such a rich discussion. And what's really striking to me is how we've explored these challenges that autistic adults face, not just in terms of their diagnosis, but also through their lived experiences and their relationships.
It's about seeing the whole person,
Right.
Acknowledging the complexities.
And I think what's even more remarkable is that this excerpt gives us a path forward, a path towards healing and empowerment.
It offers hope.
Absolutely. And it highlights the strength and resilience within the autistic community,
Yes.
which comes from embracing neurodiversity, understanding your own needs, and creating a life that's authentic and fulfilling.
Beautifully said.
So speaking of finding that power and creating a fulfilling life, I have a question for you, dear listener. If you could go back and tell, your younger self, the one who is just starting to understand what it means to be autistic,
Yeah.
what's one piece of advice you'd give them about, navigating the world?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one. What would I tell my younger self?
Yeah.
I think I would tell my younger self to really embrace those differences,
Okay.
Because I think for a long time, I tried so hard to fit in.
Right.
And I suppressed so much of who I was. And it wasn't until I started to really embrace my neurodiversity that I started to feel like I could truly be myself.
And do you think that ties back into this idea of reclaiming your narrative?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about taking ownership of your story and recognizing that your experiences are valid.
Right.
Even if they're different from the norm.
And I think it's also about offering a message of hope.
Yes.
To that younger version of yourself who maybe felt really alone.
Or they didn't belong.
Yeah, because you're not alone.
Yeah.
And there's so much beauty in being different.
It's like those challenges that you face, they actually make you stronger.
They do.
They shape who you become.
And they give you a unique perspective on the world.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And I think we've just scratched the surface
Oh, yeah.
of what this excerpt explores. There's so much more to unpack.
Definitely.
And I would really encourage everyone listening to go check out Cheap ABA Adult Autism and the Mother Wound. Healing in a Neurodiverse World.
It's such a valuable resource.
It is. So to all our deep divers out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing the power of neurodiversity. We'll see you next time.